Welcome to another episode of the Maryland Made Podcast. The Maryland Made Podcast provides timely, relevant, and practical information to empower student athletes to explore their potential and pursue their passions. I am Walt, the Big Ten Fellow in the Maryland Made unit here. And joining me today for a special episode, I have Max from the Maryland baseball program sitting across from me. And on Zoom with us, we have Taylor Liguori from the Maryland softball program. Max and Taylor, first things first, how are y'all doing today?
I mean, today's an off day, so, and my 10 a.m. class got canceled, so all I've had to do today was lift, and I'm about to go home and sleep. I'm not going to lie to you.
Can't beat that.
I'm kind of in the same boat, off day today, so feeling pretty good.
Absolutely. That's always good. Monday. Happy for both of y'all to have an off day off. Both had some long weekends, but successful weekends. So shout out to the baseball team. Shout out to the softball team with big weekends. So Taylor, I'll start with you. How has this semester been going so far? I know you're in season this semester, but how's it been going so far?
It's been good. It's junior year, so it's kind of getting down to like the nitty gritty and, managing classes. And this is like their first actual schedule that I've been a part of so far since I've been here, because my freshman year was COVID, and then last year we didn't play any preseason. So it's kind of my first time trying to balance all of that. So far it's been going pretty good, and season's good so far. So can't really complain there.
No doubt. Max.
Second semester senior here. So, while Taylor's over here getting down to the nitty gritty, I'm just kind of like, riding out the wave in some ways. Classes, school has been going amazing. I was blessed to be able to take 5 classes this semester that don't really have to do with my major, but I just kind of found interesting since I finished all my degree requirements last semester. Baseball wise, we're top 25 team. I think we're like 24-6 right now or something like that. So, life is really good right now.
Okay. Love that, man. I love that. And I've been happy to be able to go to a few of both of your games. So looking forward to that. I'm going to continue to encourage the rest of the staff here. Our baseball and softball program doing some big things. So shout out to y'all. And I want to say thank you both of y'all for joining me today on the podcast. For a special episode, I think, we'll talk about mental health today, mental wellness, and just the importance of it for student athletes, but also just, the conversations around the nation right now when it comes to mental health and kind of, working within athletics and that culture of athletics, and just why it's so important for student athletes and athletes across the nation to be having these conversations and to really share their stories. I'll let both of y'all, kind of share your stories and share how you've been advocates for mental health and wellness. But I'm excited for y'all to really, share your stories with the rest of our student athletes across the various sports, but also just our supporters of Maryland Made and the University of Maryland Athletics. So thank y'all both for being with me here today and having this conversation. And the first question that I have for you, I'll kick it to Max first, is just why is conversations, around mental health and college athletics, why is this an important conversation and topic for you?
I think the culture around, generally around college athletics, right? And then sports in general is the idea of like always doing more. Right? Like always trying to find ways to become better, always trying to get a little bit faster, a little bit stronger, a little bit, more instinctual about the things you do. Right. And in some ways, when you have that, like that constant, like 24/7 hustle mindset, like I got to keep going, got to keep doing, got to always do it. Right. That in some ways is like the embodiment of the opposite of like kind of like what good mental health is, right? So, I've always had this saying that, you should want to be like a bottle of water, right? And what I mean by that is like, life and all the things that are going to happen, you're going to like shake you up around a lot, right? And if you take a bottle of water and shake it up a lot, when you open the top, nothing happens, right? So the idea of constantly having to do more, constantly having to strive for something better, right? That's going to, in some ways, like grind you down to a point where it's like, well, if I didn't get a little bit better today, like, I didn't do anything today, and I must not be doing enough. And then like you get that like downward spiral into like, when now like you have performing anxiety, now you have anxiety, which that performing anxiety will cross over into your actual life. It was like, well, man, I gotta do more for school now. I gotta do more for in fact, I was just talking, I can give you like a example from today, right? I was supposed to hang out with a friend today, right? And I texted him. I was like, man, like, sports and stuff have kind of stressed me out lately and all that stuff, So when I hang out with you today, right, if I seem like a little bit like down, a little bit like, a little bit like irritable and stuff, like, I'm sorry about that. It's just like, the nature of being like an in-season athlete sometimes, right? And I'm blessed that, they were like, hey, man, like, we don't have to hang out today. Like, I care about you. Like, go take care of yourself. Yeah, yeah. It's your off day. Like, go just lay down in bed, do nothing. Right. And for a lot of athletes, they don't understand that they kind of need days like that. You know what I'm saying? It's like to get away from their sport, to kind of like my friend, to just sit in their bed and just do nothing all day.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So I think it's important to talk about this because you got to have the idea that there's like not necessarily like a limit to what you can do, but like there's like kind of like a line between like, pursuing your best potential, like, pursuing your best self, and then doing so much to the point where it actually starts to hurt you now.
Yeah. Big. Definitely big. Those boundaries are important.
Boundaries, bro. I mean, seriously, like, like we're human beings before athletes, right? We can't do everything.
Absolutely. Definitely. Taylor, what about you? Why is this conversation important to you?
I think, well, starting off, Max, I never heard of the water bottle analogy. I really like that one. I think that's something like a lot of people don't talk about a lot. It's like, it's this idea of like perfectionism always. And I know you kind of like touched on a little bit with like what you said, but, if we can like find a way to kind of maintain as level of ahead as possible, that's the only way that not only do we start to become better, but like everyone around us starts to become better in that too. But looking at like why it is so important, and all my life I've struggled with mental health and mental illness and stuff like that. And growing up, I was lucky enough to have a family and parents who like really gave their all into me and like helping me. But I know a lot of people and athletes that did not have that. And so when I look back at those people who weren't able to get that help and kind of where they are now, it's something that I know that I can help with. And it's something that's so important that I think it needs to be talked about. And knowing that I was able to have those resources when I was younger, and I'm still not in a place that I think is the most amazing place I've ever been in, right? Like from a mental standpoint. And I don't think anyone could probably say they're in the, head over heels and the best, like, you know what I mean? Like everyone's always got a little bit going on, but I think that if we can just continue to talk about it and spread awareness on it, like that's the most important part. So I think knowing that I've seen people deal with this and not had the blessings that I have to come out on the other side better than I was before, I think it's important to recognize that not everyone's perfect, especially us as athletes. And like Max was saying, like we're more than just athletes. You got to take care of the human before the athlete. I think it's super important to talk about that before anything else.
Absolutely, and thanks for sharing that. And through this conversation today, we'll definitely talk about some resources here on Maryland's campus and within athletics. And definitely we'll let y'all share any of those resources within athletics that y'all have utilized to kind of pass it to the next student athlete. But definitely thank you for sharing that, Taylor. And through this conversation today, I'm gonna be real honest with our listeners out there. Like, we have, an agenda, we have a rundown of, the conversation that we want to go into, but, I want, Taylor and Max to, share, and like, this will be a free flowing conversation. So, kind of the question that I have for both of them is like, what do you hope to accomplish from this conversation today? Like you said, Taylor, I believe I'm right there with you in terms of like it being a process, right? Like your journey is your journey. We all go through different journeys, and if someone tells you that they figured it out, there's still a lot more to that, still figuring it out. But I'll start with Max. But like, what do you hope to accomplish through this conversation today?
I think the biggest lesson I learned, and I hope other people, especially athletes, learn, is that, success isn't the end all be all to everything, right? I think my mental health journey is one that kind of shows that even like while I was in the midst of like the best success I've had as an athlete, that was actually the most miserable I've ever been as a person, right? So I want people to understand that, there's more to life than just, and, when I say people, I guess I'm more specifically talking about athletes and stuff, but, and I guess this could apply to people too. There's more to life than just, winning awards. Like there's more to life than fame and like having like, a ton of like money and stuff like that. Like there really is, because I've experienced that, right? So I guess kind of like I said, like the biggest thing that I want people to learn is that, success, fame, fortune, that's not the end all be all to happiness, right? Like I think the goals you set for yourself should be things that like you can't necessarily achieve, right? Like you should strive to be the most caring person you can be to people, right? Or the most loving friend, partner, son, I guess in Taylor's case, daughter, right? The most like loving person you can be to people you hold close to your heart, right? Those are things that don't have like an end date to them. You know what I'm saying? Like if I were to say that, like my sole goal in life is to, win this award, right? If I win it, what do I do after now? Right. That's it kind of, and it kind of feels like you kind of feel like empty after that now. Like what do I do now? You know what I'm saying? So I like kind of like I said before, like the success is not the end all be all to happiness.
Yeah. I love that. There's this video that I saw of like Tom Brady. This was probably like maybe after like championship 5 or whatever. And like at that point he was still the most accomplished quarterback of all time. And like after that they kind of said like are you satisfied or like are you happy? And like he was like, I won all of this, but like I'm still not, I still don't have it all, right? So like to your point, like you could be the greatest quarterback of all time, the winningest player of all time, but you still gotta be that person. You still gotta look yourself in the mirror every single day and live that life. And all of that fame, all of that success could be taken away, right? So thanks for sharing that. Taylor, what about you? Like what do you hope to accomplish through this conversation today?
Yeah, again, after Max was talking, it made me think. We actually have a quote hanging up in our locker room. And it says, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal." And it got me thinking about that because, a lot of what we talk about as athletes is relying on your success. And if you don't perform on the field, what else defines you? And I mean, heck, I'm guilty of it too, right? I mean, I'll come off the field after days that I haven't done well. I'm like, well, all right, well, my day's done, right? I got nothing else to do. All I gotta do is sit and think about how unsuccessful I was today. And I think that, I mean, Max, you're laughing. I know you've been there. Like,
bro, I was there yesterday.
Yo, literally,
especially playing games like baseball and softball, where like literally you go 3 for 10, and that's a great. If you went
you go
3 for 10 in a week,
3 for 10, and you're an All-American.
If you went 3 for 10 in a week, that's a great week.
Right. Like, and that's why I think us two talking about it is so important too, because you're talking to 2 athletes who fail way more than they'll ever succeed. Like, and I mean, Max, I know you won a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm sure your batting average still ain't hitting above 500, my man. You know what I mean? So it's stuff like that. But it's not. Max is right. It's not all about the success on the field. And if we can continue to talk about how you got to be a human first and human above athlete in all regard, right? Like if you got your priorities straight and you can take care of yourself, and I hope people can start to understand that they're not defined by the way they perform. And that's something our one of our assistant coaches tells us all the time, you know, like you're not defined by your sport, you're not defined by the performance that you have on the field on that certain day. Yeah, you could be top of the top or it could be your lowest of low days, but at the end of the day that doesn't define who you are. It's about you. And if we can continue to talk about that and have people listen to this podcast today and really understand that and take that to heart, I think it's a step in the right direction for sure.
No doubt. And both of you are, mental health and wellness advocates. Y'all utilize your platform as student athletes, you utilize your platform as leaders on your teams to have these vulnerable conversations. And I just want to, kind of ask y'all, like, why is it important for athletes like y'all too, but, across, the nation, honestly, across the world, honestly, why is it important for y'all to, have those types of, stances and be leaders and be advocates for mental health and wellness?
I mean, I feel like I'm answered first every time.
Taylor,
go ahead this time.
Yeah, I'll go. I think it's important because we're role models, right? So not only are we speaking up to help ourselves and help the person next to us who also could be struggling, who's a year older, 2 years younger, right? Like you're also helping the next generation of people that are coming in and want to be star athletes like you, right? We have a big platform that we're on, being Division I baseball, softball players in our case, right? And like I know both of our respective sports are growing rapidly every day, right? And so if I know for me, like if I see a little girl in the stands, I want to do everything I can and in my power to help her get to where she wants to go. And if that's standing in my shoes or one of my teammates' shoes, I'm gonna do everything I can to help her. And if that means that I gotta run through a wall to help her understand mentally that I'm struggling, so she knows that when she's in my spot one day that it's okay for her to speak up about it, then yeah, like I'm gonna do everything I can to do that. So I think it's important to talk about it because you never know who's struggling, right? And if one person can say something that resonates with someone else, like if I say something today that resonates with someone, I hope they reach out and talk to me about it. I hope they reach out to Max and talk about it, right? Like and I think I speak for Max and I both, like we want to be there to advocate and to help other people, like if they need stuff. And I think that, yes, it's gotten better, but a lot of the times, it's swept under the rug. I mean, Dak Prescott came out last year and talked about it, and he was denied at the door, right? No one wanted to hear it. And that just proves why no one wants to talk about it. So the more people that do talk about it and feel like it's important enough to speak up about it, that's the only way it's going to get better. So that's kind of what, like, I think that's why it's important. But I know, like, for me, after hearing about Katie Meyer, the soccer player who just recently passed, that one really personally like hit close to home for me. And I didn't know Katie, but knowing and seeing another female collegiate athlete, for that to happen to, I mean, it could have easily been me or one of my teammates, like, so thinking about it in regard to that, yeah, that's something that we need to talk about. And if you don't think we need to talk about it, then I mean, you're part of the problem. So that's why it needs to be talked about straight up.
I like your post a lot and appreciate you for sharing that with the world and like do better, be an advocate is kind of what you said, but mental health is health, and I think this is something that we all need to continue to talk about because to your point, like when there's an injury or there's like an ACL injury and people talk about that all the time, or people we have trainers that are on call constantly for physical injuries, but mental health is health as well, and I think we have to continue to be able to utilize our platforms but have these vulnerable conversations so that our friends and our teammates can understand that, like, some things that they're going through, that they have people to talk to, and it's normal, right? It's normal to experience these things. So thanks for sharing that, Taylor. Max, what about you? Like, why is it important for athletes to do that?
Taylor hit that they don't have like all this.
I do what I can, Max. I do what I can.
Taylor might be able to speak to this too, what I'm about to say, but it's yeah, I mean, I one of the things I've always noticed from fans, especially kids that are like younger, like from I say like the 12 to like high school age, I would say, is that they always see athletes, like whenever I get to meet them or sign autographs and stuff, they always like talk to me and talk about me as if like I'm not a human being, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way to say like oh like I'm just entertainment or something, but they talk to me as if like I'm like an angel or something. You know what I'm saying?
They know
like
more about your stats than you do.
like
Yeah.
they talk about us like we're perfect beings, right? And one of the things I've always thought was that I think it's important for us to talk about it like in whether it be like on social media, whether it be to like like our friends like who don't play sports on campus and stuff like that, because like when someone you look up to, I think or someone you idolize or respect can admit that they have problems too, right? I feel like it makes it easier for you to talk about it now, right? Like, I think Taylor mentioned Simone Biles, right? So if someone like Simone Biles, who I could legitimately argue is one of the greatest athletes ever, like ever, like to like
Amen.
to like ever like touch the sport of the sports, right? If someone like her could come out and say like, bro, like I'm just not feeling it, like this ain't like I'm just don't have it today, right? And admit that they get anxiety and they get nervous, right? What does that mean for like the average girl at home who like is struggling with like her tests or like struggling, this is gonna sound funny, but struggling because like she likes some dude or a girl or something like that and it can't admit her feelings, right? Right, like that to me that makes it more palpable and more like practical, that they can be like, okay, like what I'm feeling is natural, right? Like one of the like kind of like you said, we're gonna talk about like the resources at UMD and stuff. I don't know if Taylor ever had the pleasure of meeting him, but Dr. Michelle Garvin, right?
I did.
Awesome. Okay, good. So
big Dr. Garvin fan.
my first year, Dr. Garvin, told me that the idea of feeling like nervous is like a biological adaptation, right? Like when you're going to do things that like you see as like important or like you see as like being something that's worth something, right? You get nervous because your body is preparing you for that. Right. And that was one of like the most mind-blowing things I'd ever heard. Right. Because I'd always thought myself as being like, like weaker because I got nervous all the time. Right. I felt anxiety when I wanted to go do stuff. Right. And like to hear that, it's literally you're supposed to do that. Like when we talk about things like meditation and breathing and positive thinking, all that stuff, right? It's not so like you don't feel nervous and that you don't feel anxious, because we're not robots, right? There's literally never you cannot stop yourself from ever feeling that. You can't. Like it's literally impossible to never feel that, right? And if you don't, you must have a superpower or something, right? We do all those things to help us control that stuff, right? We do all that stuff to make us realize like it's more so like recognizing what we're feeling instead of like letting it overtake us, right? So when Simone Biles comes out and talks about like, yeah, like I was feeling this way, so I went, I said, I'm gonna let my teammates do this today, right? Like I'm gonna go talk to somebody, like sit down and try to figure out why I'm feeling like this. To me, that just means that more people should do it then, right? Like Simone Biles is someone who's literally all her life been performing in front of thousands and now I guess billions of people, right? If even she can feel like that when she's used to doing it, bro, like, what does that mean for the average person? Right? And if anything, it means the average person might need more help now. She has all these, Simone Biles probably has the best therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists all call, right? The average person probably doesn't have that, right? So I feel like I went on such a tangent there, but like the point I'm making in that and saying that is right. So for us, for me and Taylor and all other athletes to sit down and talk about this stuff, right? It just makes it easier to talk about for other people now. Right, like if when LeBron James and all those other athletes come out and talk about like social justice and Black Lives Matter and stuff, like it just makes it easier to talk about those things now. Right, we aren't perfect beings. We're people, right? And when we let people know that it's okay to struggle, when we let people know that it's okay to not be okay, right? It makes it easier to face those feelings now.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit it perfectly. Like talking about like younger kids or whoever, and this is just people that are fans, right? Like the culture around sports is like the athletes, right? That y'all are like superheroes and like y'all are put on this pedestal to be so perfect. And then like you mentioned like Simone Biles, who is the most decorated Olympian. I mean, like almost of all time, and like the greatest to ever do her sport, and she's on the biggest stage. And her, being vulnerable to speak about something, and like for people to even like attack her to say she just like cracked or like what's going on is just ridiculous, right? It's just and it's sad that we see people being attacked. Taylor, you mentioned like Dak Prescott, football players, being considered like that tough sport and mental. We can get into the whole conversation around mental toughness and what that truly means, but like Dak Prescott, being vulnerable and speaking out, and sharing his story, and then he was attacked for that, right? Like people not believing him or like saying he's making excuses and stuff like that. So it's sad that we're still having so many people kind of turn a blind eye to the real stuff and real people, like y'all both are saying. And that's kind of leads me to my next question. Like across the nation, like we are seeing more student athletes like yourselves, but also like pro athletes and Olympians like Simone Biles and Dak Prescott share their stories and utilize their platforms to shine a light on, why these conversations are important and the fact that mental health is real and it's, important that we have these conversations. But like, how do y'all feel like the culture, like is the culture like shifting positively or negatively like right now?
I think so. I think that it's a complex thing to kind of dissect, right? Like, yes, I think that there are certain aspects of it that are trending in a positive direction, in a positive light. Like I know when I shared my post recently, I got a lot of feedback from people that I didn't even know, messaging me and thanking me. And that wasn't the point of the post, right? I don't want to be thanked for that. I want to let people know that we talk about it, right? But besides the point, I had people coming and talking to me about it. So it's spreading. And when one person talks about it, it spreads. So in that case, yeah, I think it's trending upwards, right? Like I talked about Katie Meyer, the what's the word for it? Like the backing that she got for being such a prestigious student athlete and people that once, were her biggest enemies and rivals coming out saying that they supported all mental health causes, right? And that just, it blew up. So you look at that kind of thing and you're like, wow, how could this not be trending in a positive upward direction, right? Like we must be doing all the right things. But I mean, there's still those people, right? There's still those people that think, like you said, Walt, earlier, like you have to be mentally tough, right? I think there's a difference between being mentally tough and, being this perfect specimen, right? Like, yeah, I think I'm mentally tough. Max, I think you're probably mentally tough, right, too? And yet we go through stuff that a lot of people don't know about, right? Because they look in from the outside and they see, oh, great, like you can hit a ball with a bat. Your life must be perfect, right? And so it's these people that still are shedding this negative light on things when, I mean, yeah, it's trending upward, but there's still so much to do. So I want to say yeah, sure, like everything's great, but obviously I think we all know that things can get better, right? I mean, you talked about Simone Biles, you talked about Dak Prescott. You see the famous tennis players came out and said stuff too, right? Though it was the Ohio State football player just stopped because or he quit because he couldn't do it anymore, right? And a lot of people look at that and they're like, oh well, he's mentally weak, right? No, maybe he's got stuff going on that no one knows about, right? So I think that those people that are looking at this saying, uh, do better, right? No, like maybe you should actually take the time to listen to what we're saying, and then we'll get to an even more positive, more upward direction than we are right now.
Yeah, so I'll kick it to you. Only thing I was thinking, like when you talked about that, like around the Ohio State center, and people kind of were saying that he's maybe mentally like weak or something like that, or not mentally tough, right? But like I think that takes a great deal of strength to be able to put your,
Absolutely.
and to like step out and put yourself first, put your mental health first, and walk away from, let's just say, NFL players millions of dollars, or walk away from that full athletic scholarship that you've been kind of conditioned to be successful. But for someone to walk away from that, and someone like Simone Biles, Max, to your point, someone to on the biggest stage, right, or possibly her final Olympics, for someone to not be able to compete and to be able to be that self-aware, like that takes a great deal of strength on any level to be able to do that. So that's all I have to say that. But yeah, Max, how about you?
I mean, aside from all of the great points that Taylor made, I think the biggest problem that I see in the mental health culture, and I'm just speaking like specific to college athletics, is like I feel like everything is too like reactive instead of proactive, right? Like I feel like we only ever talk about this type of stuff when somebody comes out and says, "Oh, I gotta quit now." I feel like we only ever talk about this stuff when we hear like a tragedy like Katie Meyer, right? Like that's the only time, or Simone Biles like says that, okay, now we can start talking about it. I feel like everything is too like reactive, right? Like we're not. I feel like kind of like Taylor said, like we're moving in the right direction. Like everything. I can say that there's been a lot of like progress, but things still feel too reactive, right? Like things still feel like we can only talk about it when someone gets the I'm gonna say mental strength, because like the strength to like sit down and put it out there, right? We can only ever talk about it when someone like again like the story like Katie Meyer, when something like that happens. Okay, now we got to start talking about this now, right? I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna reference Dr. Garvin again because she's the ghost. But like I remember Dr. Garvin said like, you don't need a psychologist just for bad things, right? Like people go talk to psychologists about good things too, right? Right. I think and again that's one of the something that changed my life, right? I think that college athletics can be better in being more proactive about things, right? Be better about, having like tougher conversations with their athletes, like one of the things, we, I asked Taylor this because this is going to be funny. Like, do you guys have to do the smarter based surveys too?
Yeah.
So
Yes,
like,
we definitely have to.
like, what if we could do something where we have to fill that out every day? Right, and the smarter, so for people who don't know, who probably don't watch this, don't know, the smarter based surveys are basically like a 10, 15 questions, Taylor, something like that, right? Where it just asks you like, how are you physically doing today? Like, it'll ask you like, how sore do you feel? Like, where do you feel sore? Like, how much did you do yesterday? Like all that stuff, right? Well, why don't we have something like that for mental health too? You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, like, did you get enough sleep last night? How, like on, you could do it on a Likert scale, like, 1 to 7, like, how are you feeling about your relationships right now? How do you feel like, how do you feel coming to the field every day? Right. Because I can admit that, for there was the first couple years of college athletics, like I would have the worst anxiety about coming to the field for practice. Like I would like when I would get the notification that Coach Vaughn sent out the practice plan, I would literally feel sick to my stomach about it. Right? So like stuff like that where it's like, being more proactive about things. Like, how are you guys feeling today? Like, what do you think, what do you think you're struggling with right now? Like, hey, like here are some resources, that people you can sit down and talk to, people that you can go to if you think you need stuff, like things like that. Just a little bit more like proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah. I like that, man. Like I think that has to happen. I feel like, right? Like that has to be one of the next steps to just make it like this isn't separate from the other things that y'all need support in, right? As student athletes. And I think you brought up a great point in terms of like it's just expected to fill out your information for like how you're physically feeling. Like that's just expected, right? It's just something that is the process of being a student athlete. I think once to Taylor's post, like mental health is health. Like this is just as important, right? It's on the same level of importance, and probably even more important if we're being honest, right? Like, so I think that's kind of like just making it necessary, right? It has to be ingrained in college athletics. It has to be ingrained in our everyday life. And I'll ask y'all this question kind of off script, but I'm just kind of like reflecting on my own background and in a Black community. Like this is definitely mental health is not something that's generally talked about in the Black community, and me personally, like I reflecting on some of like my experiences as an athlete my whole life. Like there's some times when I was like a younger athlete and I'm like, bro, like I was very anxious and I could not compete to my best of ability.
I feel what you're saying.
Yeah, and I didn't notice that until I'm older and once start to have these conversations with student athletes and start to work within athletics and actually starting to get the knowledge of different mental illnesses and things like that. But like when I reflect on a lot of my childhood, it's like I had no like name to put towards these emotions and feelings. But now as I've grown, I kind of can start to see like, oh wow, I was possibly potentially going through some stuff. But I was just actually either one of you, like, has your process helped you kind of, and I guess your developmental process or being more aware of the things that you're going through, like has that helped you in terms of like reflecting on some things that you were unsure of like growing up?
I know for me, like growing up, I obviously had my fair share of things going on, but like I always thought it was normal. Like I mean, people get nervous and anxious, and I was like, oh, this must just be how everyone feels. And then as you start to realize that that's not actually how it goes, you're like, oh, well, maybe I should actually start to get taking care of myself and taking care of this a little more. And the same goes with like, the anxiety side and then the depression side too, right? And depression is such this strong word that people don't want to talk about, right? And yet we kind of throw anxiety out there like it's nothing. And I think that we can talk about the depression side too, and the fact that a lot of athletes are feeling this way and they just think that they're tired or they're sad, but in reality it's a lot deeper than that, right? And the more that I've started to learn about it, the more that I can then possibly help other people around me, right? If I see that these tendencies might be coming up, then that helps me become a better person, and it helps me then help them to also become better people. So I think that my process wasn't just meant for me to grow, but it was meant for all those around me to grow also, so that I can help them. I don't think that anything I've done in my past and the things I've gone through in phases of anxiety and phases of depression, right? I don't think that I would change any of that, because that whole developmental process has led me to being able to advocate for other people today. So, I think that coming to terms with the fact that maybe it's not as, listen, nothing's normal, right? Like there's no such thing as normal, but everyone has these feelings that they think might be normal. And if we can get to the point where we're like, hey, maybe this isn't totally normal, maybe we should really think about this more and help advocate a little bit more. That's what we got to do.
I have a joke I said with a couple of my friends who are also athletes, right? And the premise of the joke is that we're sitting around like, man, you mean to tell me there are people out here that don't have anxiety? You know, it's like right now, I feel like that's the kind of like you said, that's like the crazy thing when I look back on my life, like bro, I had some like really severe anxiety. Like not even just like athletically, but like as a person, right? Like I can remember times where I felt like, you know, I just like I would just sit alone in my room and it felt like I just couldn't do anything, right? And I think that the term for that is sensory overload. I think the term for that. Like I would just be sitting in my room like after a game, like looking at my homework, thinking about my next game, and I just sit there like I literally just couldn't move. Like I just sit there in a chair and just like for like an hour, just like unable to move, right? And like I said, like, you know, it's wild that I thought everybody was like that, right? I thought everybody like it, right? And it wasn't until I got to college, I'm like, man, you mean to tell me there are people out here that don't struggle with this? Like what must that be like? You know what I'm saying, right? So kind of like the Taylor's point, right? It was a lot of it was like kind of like thinking that, you know, oh, this is all normal, right? Like this is fine, right? That the dog sitting there in the fire with the coffee, like this is fine. You know what I'm saying? Like not realizing there isn't supposed to be all this fire around you, right? You know, so I think I'm glad that, you know, like I came out on the other side of this, you know, like I have some understanding of like, you know, like what's going on with me now, because I couldn't imagine like trying to continue living like that. You know what I'm saying? Like it like thinking of like, you know, sitting there, like being unable to sleep at night and stuff like that, you know, or like, you know, being so like kind of like I said about like, you know, the practice plans and stuff, like getting like being like feeling I'm about to throw up because I have practice today. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm glad, like, you know, it took a while. It took me all the way to, you know, my sophomore year of college. And we're like, you know, I'm glad I finally got to understand, like, you know, this, like, I shouldn't have to live like this. You know what I'm saying? This isn't healthy living like this.
For sure. Yeah. And I think, I mean, you talking about like you kind of started to figure this out once you were kind of a sophomore in college. And I think it's interesting that, of course, this podcast, you both are, you know, college students, and, you know, your former or fellow student athletes will be listening to this. But I think being a college student, and of course, being a college athlete for the first time, or like moving away from home, living on campus, not living it like at home. So not having those things that you always can kind of go to, not having those crutches that you kind of had growing up. So a lot of times I feel like you don't start to figure out, one, who you are outside of your environment until you go away from home, until you are a college student. But you know, along with that, like I feel like it's definitely so important, and we'll talk about, you know, the resources here on campus. But like, if you never, you know, went away to college, or if, you know, y'all never came to Maryland, would you be able to have found those resources? You know, so I feel like a lot of young professionals and young, you know, students, they are so used to living and repeating the cycles that they kind of had, you know, from their families and things like that. So being college students, I think is definitely important for y'all to all kind of figure out who you are, right? Find your identity, but be able to, you know, seek those resources out there. So next thing we'll kind of talk about is just resources here at Maryland or through athletics that y'all have utilized, that you know, want to either plug. I know Taylor with Sam's, but also you have referenced Dr. Garvin, who's no longer here at Maryland.
Unfortunately,
But
shout out to Parker, who's my psychologist now.
Okay, yeah. So
Parker's a goat.
Yeah, so y'all want to talk about, I'll start with Taylor, if you want to talk about any resources that you've been able to use here at Maryland.
Yeah, so I'm in SAMS, which is Student Athlete Mentors. That was something that I found out about, I believe, beginning of my sophomore year. It was kind of new, and it's kind of grown a little bit now. But it's just really focusing on helping student athletes and us advocating for all student athletes, right? So, I mean, we're still working to grow a little bit bigger, but I think it's definitely something that has helped me. We spend a lot of time focusing on not only how we can help advocate for other student athletes, but how we can better ourselves also. So it's just a group of us that really care about avocation and mental health as a whole. You know, we talk so much about you got to take care of your physical being. Like, why not take care of your mental being also, right? It's just as important. So that's one that's been big for me. I also, as Max has said, sports psych department here is awesome. Parker, Shayna, Brian. Now they're all awesome. I know I'm probably forgetting people, but they're awesome. So I definitely highly recommend both of those resources.
For me, and this is going to be kind of a weird answer, honestly, it's kind of been people like Taylor, to be honest, right? The podcast I did with you earlier this year, right? I said that the relationships that I have with the people around me are like the most important things in my life to me, right? And I say that because one of the things when I think back on like high school and stuff like that, right? I was dealing with a lot, right? Like, when I got to Maryland, it was like, they diagnosed me with like severe depression and anxiety, right? But it was one of those things where it's like I was always surrounded by like close friends and stuff in high school that it kind of like buffered those things, really, right? So when I got to Maryland, right, I did my best to kind of like, make friends with like, Taylor, you, like people like in the sports administration, like other athletes, all that stuff, because, sometimes when I was having a bad day, just sitting down, getting to talk to someone was help get me through the day. You know what I'm saying? Or, sometimes like just being around other people was enough to get me through the day, right? So if anything, right, we could talk about the sports psychology department, we could talk about all the resources on campus, but I think I'll give a shout out to the community of athletes here, right? There's some really cool athletes here that like I've gotten to meet, I've gotten to get close to, that like whether they know it or not, like have legitimately helped me get through days sometimes, right? And along with being like blessed by that, right, it also kind of made me understand that there are people who don't have that, right, who don't have those like those relationships where it's like like I can just sit down and like just talking to you helps me out, right? And we don't even have to talk about any of like the any of like anxiety, depression, or any of that type of stuff. Like literally just talking about anything, right? Just getting your mind off of the topic, right? And so, kind of like I said, right, aside from the wonderful people in the University of Maryland Sports Psychology Department, shout out to them, right? The community of athletes here, I think, is like is something special. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like you got, I can remember times where, me and like 5 or 6 kids of the track team would just be sitting around arguing about anime, right? Somebody would be like, this character's strong. Oh, but can he beat Goku though? Right? You know what I'm saying? Or going to the softball games, and like I feel like I'm the softball team's favorite athlete. You all seem to love me for some reason. I don't know why, right? But like stuff like that where I get to see other athletes at the baseball games and stuff like that. Or sometimes we'll have like like team like us and the team will go out to like some of the lesser sports. Like, bro, I'm gonna be honest. Field hockey is awesome. I don't understand what the heck's going on. I'm gonna be honest, but like it's awesome, right? So the community of it's aside from like the needing of like a good like psychology department is good like Dr. Michelle and Parker were the goats. Taylor can tell you that, right? They're the goats, right? But the community and the environment is also important too, right? You can do all the therapy sessions you want. You can do all like the meditation and stuff. But if you're not in a good environment with it too, right? That stuff is kind of negligible at that point,
Absolutely.
Right? Because if you're not in a good environment, you're not having those opportunities to really practice those things that you talk about, right? I'll give you an example, right? One of the things I talk about with Parker and I used to talk about with Dr. Garvin, the fact that it might not seem like it, I have a lot of social anxiety, right? Like, I have trouble going up and like talking to people, right? And it's funny, I play a sport where it's like, I've played in front of 10,000 plus people before, never felt the thing. It was fine, right? If you drop me in the middle of a party and ask me to go talk to a girl, I would spontaneously combust. I would just turn into a puddle on the ground, right? So honestly, like, having like, accepting athletes, right, where I can go out and like, they'll see me and they'll come talk to me, right? That kind of helped me with my social anxiety where it's like, okay, it's like positive reinforcement, like putting myself out there will yield good results. Right. And I'm much better with my social anxiety. So kind of like I was saying, right, the community you find yourself in is also really important too. Right. So not trying to take anything away from the sports psychology department, but there's some really cool people that are athletes here at the University we're on, right? And I'm blessed to get to know them.
So, love that answer, man. Definitely. And kind of like you speaking about that, I'll ask you this first though, Taylor, but Max talking about like the community of athletes, like y'all are a strong community. And a lot of times like athletics y'all are like kind of on your own, like y'all are kind of on that island, I guess kind of separate from the rest of campus, but y'all still are students, right, at the University of Maryland. So I'm sure you occupy space in your major and in your classes as well. So you can, take this, question either from that whole Maryland landscape or like, just within your athletic community, but like to Max's point, like how do we continue these conversations in the spaces that all of our student athletes occupy?
I think it's having like these kind of conversations that Max and I are having right now. I think, being able to talk with Max and with you so freely about this kind of thing is just showing that we can continue to have these conversations. And I think that to get people to want to talk about it, you got to talk about it yourself, right? I'm not going to go be a coach and tell my kids to go do something if I can't do it myself, right? Like then you've lost all credibility, you've lost all respect. So it's us continuing to talk about it and create that safe space for other people to talk about it. If I'm going to come sit here and tell you I'm going to be on this podcast and then not say anything about my growth or not talk to Max about how awesome it is that he got past his social anxiety, right? Like talking about that kind of thing, that's how you help other people. And that's how we continue these conversations. It's not about me. It's not about Max, right? It's about us helping those that come after us be safe and comfortable enough to talk now that we've spoken out also.
Oh. I'm gonna continue on from what Taylor was talking about right there, because when you asked the question, the word authenticity came to mind, right? Like being authenticity comes from like the idea that, especially in like in personality and like how you interact with people, comes from the feelings of comfort to be able to do it, right? So kind of like Taylor was saying, right? Us sitting down here and talking about like, we done struggled with some stuff, right? If there was other athletes sitting in the room, that's gonna make them feel more like comfortable being authentic because it's like, hey, like this is a space where like like you're okay being you here, right? You're okay being not having to kind of like Taylor talked about, earlier in this recording, right? Like the idea of being perfect, right? Perfectionism and stuff like that. We aren't angels, you know what I'm saying, right? So I think the idea of like authenticity, right? The idea of being like in a space where you can be authentic, right, is invaluable, right? Us sitting down here and talking about this, and hopefully this, a lot of athletes listen to this. That'd be kind of sad if they did. just Walt's putting all this work into this, right? I mean, I would hope that like listening to us talk about this, right, makes you feel more comfortable being authentic, right? Makes you more comfortable with the idea that you don't have to have a persona that you put on when you go to either the track or the basketball court or the football field, baseball field. Is it a field, hockey field? I don't know. Probably, right? Like, you're you, right? Like, and even more importantly, like, even with all the struggles and stuff you've had, you still made it here, right? So, like, if you made it here and you were dealing with all this stuff, like, imagine what you could do if you weren't. You know what I'm saying? Right? This is a joke. One of my really good friends from high school. He plays rugby at Towson. I'm sorry, rugby at UMBC. He was playing against I have another friend that plays rugby at Towson, actually. And he made this joke before, right? He said, he was like, man, if I didn't have anxiety, I'd be ruling the world by now, right? And he said it as a joke, right? But in some cases that might be true, like, I bet you there's millions and millions of people out there who never reach their potential because, like, they're just so anxious about stuff, right? They never had those like relationships with people who would be there to put their arm around, like, yo, you got this, you know what I'm saying? Or they never had the and Taylor talked about this earlier in the podcast too. Like, they never had like the resources or the education about this stuff to get over this. So they never got to do what they wanted to do in life. Right. And that's heartbreaking to me. Right. So to sit here and talk about this stuff is more, what could be more heroic than that? We talk, I'm a really big anime comic book guy. Sorry, Taylor. and Stan Lee once said that and I'm gonna mess the quote up because it's been so long since I've read it, but the quote it goes along the lines of something like, what could be more heroic than doing the right thing even when it scares you? Right? It's scary to talk about this stuff, bro. It is. It really is, right? When I wrote that you mentioned it earlier, that article talking about, when I talk about, my experiences with being suicidal, right? Bro, I was terrified to put that up. It was terrifying, right? Because, I didn't know how people would react to it, right? I didn't know, like, what if people see me as less now? What if people look at me and they're like, I'm not what they thought I was now, right? But what if there's someone out there who's dealing with the same things I'm dealing and reading this stuff, right? I feel like that one person is more important than the millions who would be against me for that, right? And what could be more heroic than that? So this is scary. All this stuff is scary. All this stuff is terrifying to deal with, right? But there's something to be won here, right? To changing what could be better than changing lives? You know what I'm saying? Or helping someone.
Thanks for sharing that, man. And I'll go back to Taylor's point earlier too, talking about when she wrote her post as well. When you said the goal wasn't to get people to say congratulations or thank you for sharing that, or like you're so brave, or like, and to your point, like, you were terrified because of what you thought people would, say. But I'm sure the outpouring was a lot of love and a lot of like thank yous as well. So I think to that point, right, like that sums up how heroic it was, right? Because there's so many people out there that read that were moved by that. And a lot of those thank yous, a lot of those, appreciate you and thanks so much for sharing that, was because there were so many people who don't probably feel like they could have spoke that. So like y'all spoke for them. So that's why I want to, again, thank y'all both for like being vulnerable to share this with me today. Like, and the student athletes that are listening, it'll definitely, if it doesn't change, like to Max's point, we're putting in some work. And again, I appreciate both of y'all, but like, if there's one student athlete, right, that listens to it, right, that's a win.
It's a win. That's a win, bro.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so definitely want to thank both of y'all.
Absolutely.
To kind of sum it up, I had just one final question for y'all. What are like Max? I know you suggested like that mental health check-in, like have a physical check-in, but like, what's like one change or like something that you really want to see happen or advocate for in the next few, let's say weeks, honestly, right? Let's just be that bold. But like, what's something that you feel like from the seats of student athletes or something that y'all can start to like enact right now to to help this conversation?
We had to stop doing them because of COVID, but like I really liked like the all athlete events.
Okay.
I thought those were the coolest thing ever, right? Like just because I'm gonna be honest, because of like scheduling and stuff, like bro, there's some teams that like I might see once every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Right. I'll give you an example. Like girls in the field hockey team, right? Or the tennis team, or I'm gonna be honest, like, if I didn't reach out and go out of my way to see them key on the football team, basketball team, like it feels like sometimes, a lot of us were like just within our own team sometimes, like that's the circle of our team. And those events, right, when we had those all athlete events and like, we had like those even sometimes the Zoom events sometimes, right? It was like you got to like, just start meeting people and start seeing new faces, right? And then like, hey, like I saw this person on social media and go follow them or something like that. And then you have a connection right there, right? And then you see they post something on their story about anime. Like, hey, like they like anime too. And this is the story of how I became friends with a lot of kids in track. but that those like stuff like that where you like, we all got together to just kind of like have some food, like sit down and just talk about life, right? It helped, especially like freshman year, me like make a lot of connections. You know what I'm saying? So if there's anything I'd want to see come back, when it's safe, right? It's those, right? I feel like those did a lot for me.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. And we could probably do a whole episode on the COVID impact. I know Taylor, you started with like this is like your first like full year, I would say, like without having a huge COVID impact. So to Max's point, yeah, I definitely think something like that, just building that community aspect, building the student athlete community, making it stronger together, I think is definitely a step. And thanks for sharing that. Taylor, I'll kick it over to you to close us out in terms of what's something that you would like to see happen.
Yeah, I have thought a lot about it, especially since my post, because, I think it's easy to put something out and then not really have a, in academic terms, they call it like a call to action, right? Like, and I don't know that I have all the answers for things that need to be done or what I want to see. I think that it definitely starts from higher up, right? So if people like the NCAA can, get involved and do as much as they can to continue to advocate for that, right? Yeah, I think people will start listening. It's like a trickle down effect. The more people that you get involved, the more it'll be talked about. So if you can have high up people talk about it, to then continue to have people underneath continue to talk about it, that's how it's going to get better. And I think Max brings up a great point about the all athlete events and that sense of community, like you talked about earlier. You get the sense of community with hanging out with people. And if you don't know anyone because you don't have these events, then it's kind of hard to feel that sense of community and safety and accountability for one another. So I definitely think, seeing the higher ups getting more involved and continuing, I think they have done a pretty decent job of advocating, but, maybe doing an even bigger job of putting on events and hosting different things would definitely be something that I'd be interested in seeing for sure.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. So that's all I have for y'all. I mean, again, I want to thank y'all both for your time with y'all. Y'all both in season. So these are two student athletes that are in season that still took the time out to have this conversation. But conversations for our student athletes out there listening that please, reach out to Taylor and Max. Like they're friendly people. I promise you that. They're also SAC team reps. They're, leaders and they're both SAMs as well. So please, I'll make sure to put their info their social media info and LinkedIn info in the episode notes. I'll also make sure to put all of the Maryland athletic mental health resources here as well as the campus resources. So in the episode notes, y'all will be able to find that. So to our student athletes, please, stay connected with Taylor, Max, stay connected with the Maryland Made team. We're here for y'all. Please don't be strangers. Stop by Gossett Hall. We have a nice conference room right here that Max is sitting in. Taylor will be visiting soon, but nice conference room for y'all to stop by if y'all, just want to chat with the Maryland Made team. We're here for y'all as well. And then to our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Maryland Made podcast. Please be sure to download, subscribe, and share our episodes on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. Make sure you're following Maryland Made on Instagram and Twitter at MDMadeTerps and connect with us on LinkedIn as well. And until next time, be who you are, do what you want. And until next time, peace.